Hey everybody, thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Technicolor Blood. We are happy to have you here once again this week. We have so much to get to this week, so much news. Last week, kind of a light news week. This week, the opposite of a light news week. So who knows what we'll get to. We've got a ton of stuff, but my name's Chris. Again, glad you're here. Terrence is here as well. How's it going, Terrence?
Hey, I'm doing okay. Looking forward to talking about all the news because, as you pointed out, there's a ton of it.
There's so much. Yeah, pretty much as soon as we finished recording last week, a bunch of news kicked up and continued on through the week. So we have no shortage of things to talk about. I guess a good place to start, since we've been tracking this basically since all the controversy kicked up with James Gunn, a good place to start is that now officially, even though they never really came out with a release date, Disney Marvel is delaying the release of Guardians of the Galaxy 3 due to all the issues they've had. And when you read something like that, you think, okay, well, like, how serious is that really? Is it going to be a long delay? Well, again, they never actually named a date, but in the article I read, they actually specifically said that those folks who were in the small crew who were about to start pre-production have been told they're free to look for other work. So that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that certainly implies that it's going to be kind of a long delay.
A long delay, and it again makes me wonder if they've been testing the waters on getting a director and just haven't been able to either get the person they want, or maybe like we talked about before, maybe someone who's more of note just won't even touch that movie.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Certainly, if they're letting the people who are working on pre-production now go, then the plan must be to just scrap whatever they have. Which, you know, we kind of discussed the fact that them using James Gunn's script was kind of hypocritical. So It sounds like if they're planning to scrap everything, they might just be planning to start the script from scratch as well.
Man, what a crazy drama this has been since the start, and I'm surprised that they couldn't at least pull it together to get production ramped up. I mean, a mega company like Disney and a mega property like Guardians of the Galaxy 3, you would have thought that there would be someone who would step up. And again, we don't know officially how much they've been reaching out to potential new directors. We just don't know that. But clearly they're seeing enough of an issue right now to delay production, putting all these people and telling them to go look for other work. I mean, that's a big deal, and I don't know what that means for the actors, because they were really talking more about some crew members
right
in the early stages. So I don't know what that means for the cast. I mean, obviously, so many of those guys are going to be doing, and women are going to be doing other things.
Yeah, that's a super busy cast. I mean, they don't just have a bunch of downtime where they can just start a major motion picture any old time. So, I mean, if they're delaying the start of production on this film, then it's going to be impressive to see how they're able to pull everybody together on it.
Yep. I really thought that the next update for this whole story was going to be, okay, they've reached out to several directors and here are the names, and then a couple of weeks later we'd have a name. But instead, they're shutting down. So
yeah. And again, as we keep pointing out, this is all self-inflicted. This is Disney doing it to themselves.
Yeah.
And looking terrible. I mean, I really just don't know who's on their side in this.
Yeah, they went into a tailspin with this. They had a chance to pull themselves out of it, I think, and they just sort of passed on that.
Yeah.
And now, like the Big Lebowski said in that movie, the goddamn plane has crashed into the mountain. So, all right, we'll obviously continue to track that story as the weeks go on. It may be months now before we have another update. Who knows?
Yeah.
Also,
I wouldn't bet on it, though, the way this has been going.
True.
I suspect something will happen next week.
That's true. Another comic book movie universe news. Very recently, in fact, I think 2 days ago, Alec Baldwin was named as Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne's father, in the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie. And then yesterday, the very next day, he actually squelched that story. I don't know if it's one of those things where it was just... The first story I had read said that he had actually signed on. Well, clearly that doesn't... I mean, the very next day, he pulls the ripcord on it. I wonder if it has something to do with the odd speculation I saw that the Thomas Wayne character might be loosely based on Donald Trump, which just makes that movie sound even more ludicrous.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like that was ever a real thing to begin with. And in fact, in response to that, Alec Baldwin quickly slapped that down and said that that's not true. It won't be in any way connected to what he was doing, what he won an Emmy for, playing Donald Trump. So those comments seem to indicate that that was a real thing, that was a deal that had actually come together. So him not doing it certainly sounds like he's walking away from the project. I saw that he had some kind of backhanded insult on the way out the door where he said it's a role that 25 other guys could play.
Yes, he did say that. And I'm sure he's not wrong.
Oh, yeah. I don't doubt it at all. But, I mean, that being said, wasn't the role in the Mission Impossible film that he was just in also something 25 other guys could play?
I mean, honestly, a lot of character actor roles are sort of that way. You know, I'm not taking away from character actors, but I mean, like that role you just mentioned, and I doubt that the Thomas Wayne character is going to have the type of depth that requires Alec Baldwin.
Yeah. And let's not forget that, I mean, maybe the thing that he's most famous for in his career is that he's the guy who had the Jack Ryan franchise and walked away from it after one movie, The Hunt for Red October, to go make The Shadow. So he doesn't make the best career decisions.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, quick side tangent. I'm actually sick of his Trump impersonation. I've never really a huge fan of it in the first place.
Right.
I'm sure he's going to keep doing it, but I'm ready for them to do something else with that.
The thing that blows me away about this is, regardless of how good or bad the particular role that he was going to play would have been, it was his chance to work with Martin Scorsese.
True.
Well, he hasn't worked with a director of that caliber in decades.
Yeah, and of course, you know, we still don't know how involved Scorsese's going to be, but you would think that would be something that would attract. Maybe that's part of what happened. You know, who knows? Maybe he was attracted to the project because of that, and then found out that Scorsese really isn't having much to do with it. Who knows? It's all speculation at this point. So, speaking of the DC universe, a little interesting tidbit of information that I had not heard before is that the DC Universe is releasing a paid subscription service. I guess this is the future now, where everyone has a paid subscription.
Yes.
And if you've listened before, you know, not the biggest fan of the DC Universe movies. I know I assume that it's going to encapsulate everything, all their animated stuff, which from what I understand is actually very good.
Yes. That's correct. I believe it even extends to online comic books as well.
Right, online comic books, the proverbial monthly contests, all kinds of online content, anything to get them to jump on. It's $7.99 a month, and I assume it's going to have the whole backlog of all the movies as well, all the Zack Snyder stuff, and
presumably.
I mean, see why it wouldn't.
The fact that they're cobbling together their entire back catalog of animated films, I would assume that also includes the live action stuff. Yeah. I mean, for the price, if you're a comic book fan, I don't know that it's a bad deal. I mean, It sounds like you get a lot of content. If you
don't really watch a lot of TV or movies, but you're a huge comic fan, and especially a DC comic fan, then it's probably a great deal. Otherwise, you know, your cable and or Netflix and all the other choices out there. I mean, it's just very specific, and it kind of made me wonder if you know, I know Disney's going to have their own streaming service coming out famously soon, and there's a lot of sort of uncertainty about the Star Wars movies that are going to be on and aren't going to be on, the Marvel movies that will and won't be, the current contracts that are running through with TNT for the Star Wars movies, all those things that we've hit on in the past. I kind of wonder how much they could get a month for just a Marvel dedicated streaming service. They won't need it because it's going to be Disney, but at that $7.99 price point, I assume Marvel could do better.
It seems to me like this might be a glimpse into the future of streaming, wherein movie and television content is just not enough to get people to subscribe. That the Amazon Prime model, where, you know, you get videos, but you also get music, and then you get the free shipping that comes along with the purchases you make through Amazon. I wonder if everyone is trying to create their own flavor of that. Mm-hmm. You know, DC's like, well, what do we have? We've got movies and cartoons and comic books, and, you know, video games probably are mixed into that. So it makes you wonder if, when Disney comes around to doing their streaming service, if it's going to be more than just content, but it's also going to include Marvel Comics and discounts at the Disney parks and Disney merchandise, and, you know, and these studios that are just traditional studios that can't offer all that extra content or all that extra product, let's say, where does that leave them? Yeah,
and I wonder if maybe if another portion of that, maybe with Disney in the future, that Disney streaming service, if they might try to do sort of like the Movie Pass thing, where you can have a subscription service, but it would just be for the Disney, you know, Marvel, Star Wars content under their umbrella. Right. So it's, you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. It's constantly evolving. It changes so quickly now. Yeah. So some more, speaking of Star Wars, there's another casting decision announced this week. This is going to be Matt Smith, who's best known, I think, for being one of the many doctors from Doctor Who, is joining the cast of Star Wars Episode 9. I think recently they also announced that Dominic Monaghan of Lord of the Rings and Lost fame is going to join the cast as well. So casting news starting to come through. We've already heard, I think, that Billy D. Williams is going to be in the movie. They're going to repurpose some footage from Carrie Fisher that wasn't used in previous films to put her in it. So there's sort of a trend here. I think when I first saw this story about Matt Smith, and also I guess I should also mention that he's currently, I think, in that show The Crown on Netflix. So my first thought when I saw this was it seems like they're casting a lot of TV actors, but I mean, a lot of them were TV actors who've gone on to movies and have made a mark. So
right.
That was specifically with Dominic Monaghan. I'd completely forgotten his Lord of the Rings turn.
Yeah, so the way they're enlarging this cast so much, it kind of makes me wonder what the plan going forward is regarding the Rian Johnson trilogy that's supposed to start at the completion of this film.
Yeah.
Does it directly tie to the current trilogy? Are we going to see some of these characters continue on in that? Are they building characters specifically to kind of bridge the gap between the two trilogies? I don't know what their plan going forward is, but it certainly sounds like they're not casting for this to be the end of anything.
Sure, yeah. And I think just to tie up what I was saying before, Adam Driver is another guy who I think got a start in television, and he was known for being in that show on HBO, Girls. I never saw it, but he was a big time character in that, and now he's a big movie star. So yeah, who knows what's going on with Star Wars, man? And I know this isn't connected to obviously the Solo Star Wars movie, but they're sort of all connected in that they're all Star Wars movies. So it kind of makes me wonder if they're making any decisions on Episode 9 based on what had happened with Solo, as far as casting or maybe taking things into a different direction or intertwining it with the other films, like you mentioned.
I don't know. I mean, obviously, a little bit of the reaction to that was to make sure that they locked JJ up as the director,
right?
Which is a smart move. He's the guy who's proven that he can make it rain for Star Trek and Star Wars. So
yeah, he's the safest pick they could possibly go with, but also the smartest.
Yeah.
So don't begrudge him for that at all.
Yep.
HBO news. The Watchmen. They did a Watchmen pilot for HBO, and it's been picked up to go to series. All I know really about it is that Damon Lindelof is going to be the showrunner. Oof. And he did at least, I don't know how many seasons of Lost, but he was involved with Lost. Is he the one who took over for JJ after the first season?
Well, one of the pair that took over after JJ left.
Right, one of the bad seasons.
Yeah, the whole rest of the show was and Orcs.
Yeah, if you talk to me, and I think Terrence as well, I mean, Lost was pretty great for a good portion of the first season and then just completely went off a cliff. I was stupid enough to continue watching it, whereas Terrence pulled the ripcord.
Yeah. Listen, when JJ left that show, the change in quality was palpable.
It was dramatic, yes. And Lindelof also did The Leftovers on HBO, which was another troubled production. First season was highly anticipated, kind of went over like a rock. It was a big thud, and then they relocated it to Central Texas and changed almost everything. And the last season was interesting, but it never really recovered from that, whatever that first season was. But he is definitely a genre guy. He
wrote the Transformers movies.
Yeah, that's not an endorsement. So, I mean, it's Watchmen. I'll be interested to see it. I'll definitely check it out when it comes. I have seen some names from the cast. Now, when I say these names, understand that I have no idea how relevant they are, how big a role they have, but here's some names I've seen. Don Johnson.
Oh, what?
You think that's bad? Louis Gossett Jr. I don't really know what's happening there. I think the principal actor is Jeremy Irons right now, but I don't know if that means he's playing Rorschach or if he's playing one of the other main characters. Apparently they're going to introduce new characters. I assume that means that they weren't in the comic. I don't really know. I'm not versed in Watchmen lore. I just really kind of vaguely remember the Zack Snyder movie. And of course the big blue guy, naked big blue guy. So hopefully that won't be Don Johnson.
But it is HBO, so you're definitely going to get a naked dude.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no doubt about it. So any interest in that one? I mean, it's genre, it's Watchmen. Pretend I hadn't told you about the casting.
My issue with this is that the Watchmen movie that Zack Snyder put out a few years ago, I mean, that was your best case scenario for adapting the Watchmen. I mean, it is maybe the single most perfect comic book story in that it works perfectly as a comic book and just does not work outside of that genre. It just does not work.
Yeah.
And the movie kind of showed that. I mean, they changed what they had to change and tried to stay faithful in the ways that they best could. And you got this movie that is perfectly fine, but as far as movies go, it's weak adapting a comic that is one of, if not the highest regarded comic book of all time. So now they're trying to adapt it again, this time in the form of a television series. And again, they're just going to run into the same problems that they had trying to make the movie. It's not a story that it lends itself to another medium.
Yeah. Yeah. And, HBO's, I'm sure, trying to load up and preparing for what Game of Thrones is going to leave behind whenever it goes. After the final season.
Right. So this makes me think of how Amazon is doing a Lord of the Rings series as well. It's like we're just, 1 decade out from these being films in movie theaters, and they're already being remade in the form of TV shows. Is it necessary? Can we not get anything else original? Why are we having to rewatch this stuff?
Yeah, it's just sort of the trend of the industry now. That seems like it's been going on for 15 years.
Yeah, it's been going on.
Sequels and existing material and nothing original.
But I mean, prior to this, they would take another stab at something that didn't work, right? Like the Lost in Space movie was terrible. So they're like, okay, let's make it into a TV show. Fine, I get that. That makes sense. But The Watchmen was not terrible. It was admirable. I don't think they're going to do better than that.
Yeah.
But here we are. We're gonna get a TV series out of it.
Yep.
And I mean, hey, wait and see. But like, we're clearly right at the cusp of this thing where they're taking something that was successful and then just immediately remaking it again. We'll see how that works out. We'll see if this is going to be a trend that just keeps going and going, or maybe these won't do well and it'll just be kind of a blip on the map.
Yep, we'll see. I mean, I have a lot of confidence in HBO. They've done some great stuff over the years, but
they've also done not great stuff.
They've also done not great stuff. Sure, I'm just I'm not really feeling this one, but considering the genre, considering the source material, I'll at least give it a shot. All right, in the next segment, we're going to continue with some news, but we're going to get away from the genre stuff and talk about some other news going on in the world right now.
So in other news, it turns out that Woody Allen's latest film might not actually get released. He's got a crazy batting average where he puts out a new movie every year. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't quite realize it was that regular,
I didn't know he was that consistent.
yeah. He's a machine. But his latest, which he has made in conjunction with a deal that he's got with Netflix, I think it's like a 3-picture deal or whatever. The latest one, which is finished and apparently ready to go, has now been shelved indefinitely with no explanation given for why that is. Again, there's no explanation, but if we were going to just, for the fun of it, speculate wildly, it might be that this movie was completed right about the time that the Me Too movement fired off. And, Woody Allen's got a colorful past.
Yeah, and in fact, when I saw this, I wondered to myself if it had something to do with Me Too, not knowing if there'd actually been a reason given. So we're thinking on the same wavelength there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most logical explanation, and I think everyone's got to be kind of thinking the same thing.
Yeah, sketchy past. Yeah, and sort of related, but not really. We'll just mention real quick. I'm sure you guys have heard that Louis C.K. did a surprise stand-up routine at the Comedy Cellar, which is like his haunt in New York. Showed up and did 15 minutes, did not do any material at all related to what happened with him, which I think a lot of people were surprised by, because his whole thing is talking about the horrible decisions he makes in his life and how terrible of a person he considers himself to be in the context of his own little comedy show, which we're supposed to know is a joke. So I think a lot of people thought it was interesting that he didn't bring it up. Now, for him, this and understand the context of what I'm saying here. For him, this is a no-win situation. He could have done anything, and people were going to rightfully slam him for it, because it hasn't even been a year, or maybe it's been barely a year.
No, it's been 9 months.
Yeah, that's just not enough time. And full disclosure, I'm a huge Louis C.K. fan, but no.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a time where he probably can come back, but it definitely is not now or really anytime soon.
Yeah, and he's going to have to do something to show some level of contrition for what he does. I mean, he can't just...
More than his statement did.
Yeah, exactly. He can't make the statement owning up to the horrible things that he did, disappear for a few months, and then just expect to step back in and pick up where he left off. That's just not going to fly.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I saw a pretty good amount of debate on Twitter. I have no idea what the ratio is, but it seemed like there were far more people, obviously, who were upset about it than were supporting him. But there still are a handful of people who are out there like saying, well, the guy's got to make a living. You can't stop him from making a living, you know. And I see a lot of articles that are still calling them allegations, which is strange, right? Because he admitted to it.
Yeah, exactly. I saw the same thing and was baffled by it.
Yeah, but the reason I sort of tied that is because, you know, before Louis C.K. went down so hard, he was about to release a film as well that got pulled, and I think it was called "I Love You, Daddy," something like that. And there were some issues explored in that film apparently that were sort of related to his real life experiences, which is really sort of a dick move.
Yeah,
I mean, to put that out there. Anyway, I just very confused by his strategy here. So, you know, I like I said, I'm a big fan, but I don't really have any interest in seeing him doing his thing for quite a while now. I mean, and even when the time comes, I'm sure I'll feel strange about it. So who knows? Yeah.
So, I mean, as long as we're on this topic, we might as well go from bad to worse. And that is that just today, news came out that Gerard Depardieu had been charged with rape in France, rape of a 22-year-old actress. He's officially denying that, says that it's categorically untrue, but there you go.
Yeah, well, you kind of have to, I guess, if you're him.
Yeah.
I mean, what else are you going to say?
You know, he's one of those guys that's also had a slightly colorful past.
Really? I don't really know much about him.
You know, known for some lewd behavior when he's been heavily intoxicated, like that time on the plane when he decided to just whip it out and relieve himself in his seat.
That is a problem. He's going to have a hard time getting the benefit of the doubt in this deal.
Yeah. So that's, you know, he hasn't really made much of a mark in the U.S. in quite a while.
Right.
But, you know, he was still a very successful actor in France and still made quite a few movies over there. You know, popped up here occasionally from time to time. And, you know, at one time was a pretty highly regarded actor that, you know, he had his time in the sun.
Yeah. And you're telling me that Luc Besson also is getting tangled up in this?
So I knew nothing about this, but in the course of reading the articles about Depardieu, there was also mention that he's the second French filmmaker within the last year that's had rape allegations leveled against him. So I looked into that to see who the other was, and the other was Luc Besson.
Good Lord,
I had heard nothing about that, but yeah, apparently he also has been accused of raping a young actress.
Jeez.
And that got me thinking about the fact that, you know, he released that film, I guess maybe last summer. I don't even remember now how long ago it was. It was a resounding bomb, at least here in the U.S.
Oh, that big sci-fi thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, okay. How was that?
It was Wachowskian.
Oh, okay. For people at home who might not be clear on Chris's thoughts about the Wachowski, he could spend an hour telling you how massively overrated they are.
Yes, and terrible.
Yes, well, yes. But anyway, so it got me wondering if maybe Luc Besson's disappearance was less connected to how badly that film performed and more connected to, it turns out that he might just be a terrible dick.
Yeah, wow, you'd think, I mean, now I don't know the timing of these issues, but I assume from the timing that we're discussing now that they've happened relatively recently, certainly since everything, you know, the Me Too movement kicked up. You would think that would have some of the guys who were, you know, predisposed to do this kind of thing would have second thoughts about it, but clearly not. Yeah,
it kind of makes you wonder if maybe it's just taken this long for the ripples of the Me Too movement in Hollywood to flow out to the French film industry. Maybe they're having their moment now, kind of like the U.S. had a year ago.
Right, yeah. Okay, I'm actually excited about this one because I don't know anything about it, so I'm going in completely blind. But tell me about this Orson Welles story.
Yeah, so now we're going to have some good news, at least good news for big film fans.
For now.
Well, for now. So it looks like Amazon is going to be releasing the long-lost last film of Orson Welles. Sometime in the mid-'70s, he shot a film, not quite completing it, so it was put on a shelf somewhere and left alone to become the stuff of Hollywood legend. Virtually no one has seen any footage from it. No one has ever seen anything close to a full cut of the film, and for that reason, it's become a bit of a myth. People have kind of hyped it up and fantasized about what it could be and maybe how good it could be if he, had one last great film in him.
Yeah.
And it looks like we're going to finally get to see. It looks like the original maybe producer on the film, Frank Marshall, is been able to kind of cobble together what was left. He's got some funding for it, and it's going to actually see the light of day, maybe even get a theatrical release. It's kind of exciting.
It's crazy that it's taken this long to take shape. If that was the case, if they found something that just sat there forever for a guy who's such a legend,
yeah,
that's insane to me.
Yeah, from the 70s. You would think that if it had existed all this time and was just sitting on a shelf somewhere, somebody long ago would have taken a crack at finishing it up.
Like, you would think that one of the more prominent directors now, or in the past 20, 30 years, would be pushing that, like a Spielberg type guy who just is interested and knows about this and is interested in it and wants to bring it forward, kind of like Spielberg did with Kubrick's AI treatment or whatever it was.
Yeah, it does sort of raise the specter that maybe it was so far from completion that it couldn't be finished until now, where we have the level of technology that we've got.
Right.
There might be a lot of CG elements worked into it to create the additional footage necessary to actually turn this into a workable film. Who knows for sure. I do want to make one quick correction that I knew was wrong the moment it came out of my mouth. It's not Amazon that's funding this, it's Netflix. So this is going to be a Netflix film.
Netflix, okay. All right. That's exciting. I'll look forward to that. So another more current story I think that's kind of worth touching on. Neither of us, I don't think, has seen this movie yet, but Crazy Rich Asians is kind of a big deal right now.
It's a very big deal. And
in its second week, it only had a 6% drop, which it turns out, and obviously I didn't do the math in my head, but I read that is the 24th best hold from week 1 to week 2 for movies that have that have at least 3,000 theater release. So that's pretty
very
impressive.
Specific.
It's very specific, yes. But I mean that's quite impressive, and I was pretty surprised to read a couple of weeks back that it's the first completely Asian cast film in America since the Joy Luck Club.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was kind of hyped before it came out, and I kind of blew my mind. Like, it's sort of outrageous that that's the case.
It is. It's really strange. And then you think, wow, well, someone skated by for the industry skated by for years without having another Asian-led film like that, and now there probably is going to be an explosion of them, which is great.
Well, yeah, I mean, with only a 6% drop, that's incredible. I mean, for those of you who don't really know, I mean, a typical drop is like 50% from week 1 to week 2.
For movies that are massively successful.
Yeah, major, big budget, popcorn kind of movie. So, I mean, this is impressive.
Yeah, the only movie I can think of off the top of my head that now I don't know what statistics it had as far as the percentages week to week, but I know like The Sixth Sense was another one that gained a lot of word of mouth,
right.
and had some impressive week to week earnings, but I don't know where those numbers fall. I was hoping that the article I saw that gave those statistics would actually show me a chart so I could see what the other 23 movies ranked ahead of it were.
Yeah, that would be fascinating.
No
to
such
know.
luck.
Yeah.
I sort of lied to you earlier when I said we were moving on from the genre stuff. One more piece of information I want to run by on the genre side. Tom Hardy's Venom film that's coming out in, I think, October. He let it loose this week that he's actually signed on for 3. The article I read was a little ambiguous because it stated something like, a typical deal like this where they're signed up for 3 movies, it does still entirely depend on how the first movie does, which sort of harkens back to when we talked about Solo, kind of wondering how that would go since the main actor was signed up for 3 movies. So from what I gleaned, even though he signed on for 3 films, it does depend on how the first movie does, and it wasn't entirely clear what those 3 movies would be, if it'd be one of those things where he's showing up in other films, or if it's supposed to be its own standalone trilogy. Tom Hardy mentioned something in the article himself about how he's very open to it just becoming its own universe, that he would just show up wherever they want to take him. He just basically sounds like a total team player when it comes to this movie. He's just willing to do whatever, show up whenever, just I'll do the work, you guys tell me where to go. Which
is basically kind of what I've always heard about him on every film that he works on. He's just one of those guys. It's interesting that he's been signed to a 3-picture deal. He was also signed for a 3-picture deal when he was cast as Mad Max. And, that movie was very, very successful, and we haven't heard word one about any follow-ups to it. I mean, I know it was tangled up in some legal issues regarding box office and,
cuts, who got a certain cut of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, it might still be in legal limbo. But that's interesting that apparently, if you're going to cast Tom Hardy in something, you just go ahead and ink him for 3 movies.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think Fury Road is the only time I've ever heard of anything where Tom Hardy wasn't completely pleased with what was going on set. I remember reading that he found himself very frustrated at the sort of improvisational nature of the shooting.
Right.
Not that he was like a pain in the ass or a dick about it, but that just he found that he was frustrated with it.
Which is kind of understandable because Mad Max Fury Road didn't have a script. There was no physical screenplay. George Miller just commissioned an artist to create essentially a storyboard that was more like a comic book representation of the film, and that's what he gave his actors, and basically said, trust me, I know what I'm doing.
Yep.
And
and boy did he.
Yeah, I can see why an actor might have a little bit of trust issues regarding that.
Back to television for a second. The Roseanne show that was canceled a couple of months back now, I guess, after the racist comments by Roseanne Barr on Twitter. It had been announced that they're going to do a spin-off show called The Connors about her family, and John Goodman let it loose this week that the plan is to kill off Roseanne. Well,
they're definitely sending a message there that there is no chance she can get back in the door.
Yeah. And I don't think that had actually been, I don't even know if that had been broached at all.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah.
But, I mean, certainly if there's room for Louis C.K. to slink back into things, then why not Roseanne?
Yeah. Yeah, so John Goodman let that fly. He also mentioned in the article that, he was heartbroken when he saw the comments that Roseanne made. I guess you can't not be at least a little bit close to a person when you star with them for so many years, and then obviously 20 plus years off, and then you're back together again. And I'd seen them interviewed before Roseanne's fall together and leading up to the release of the new show, and you could always tell that John Goodman was extremely uncomfortable with Roseanne letting her political opinions fly on the various talk shows that they did press for leading up to the debut.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. All right, so there's also some Maverick news I see this week.
Yeah, just an interesting little footnote. Maverick, which is the sequel to the original Top Gun, still starring Tom Cruise. Its release date has been pushed back by a full year, which kind of, as we were hinting on when we were discussing Guardians of the Galaxy, when you've got a major star like Tom Cruise, his schedule is booked years and years and years out. So to take a film, push back the release date by a year, presumably that's going to be aligned with the production date. That's gonna involve a lot of schedule juggling to make that all work out. So that was kind of surprising to me to see. But I guess it's encouraging that movie is still coming out.
Sure.
If I was on the fence about it before, and I don't know really whether I was or not, I hadn't given it any thought at all. Having seen the latest Mission Impossible film and, kind of being impressed by Tom Cruise in it and getting back on the Tom Cruise bandwagon, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I want to see what he can do.
Sure.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun project for all involved. So eventually when it actually comes out, I'll be looking forward to it as well. One more little tidbit here, Terrence. I see that you have in our show notes that Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, which we talked about a week or two ago.
Right. We had talked about the trailer to
Right.
it. So that movie, which was produced by Netflix for the purposes of being released on their streaming service, it looks like advanced buzz on it is so good that Netflix is toying with the idea of releasing it into theaters as an actual theatrical film.
Yeah.
And I mean, that seems like a no-brainer to me. You've got an Academy Award winning director, pay him the respect he deserves. You should.
He's an amazing visual director.
Yeah, absolutely. His films need to be on a big screen in a theater.
For sure. Totally agree.
I'm super excited to hear that. And as I mentioned, there have been some very, very early reviews of the film, and they're all positive.
Sure.
I will say it seems like in recent years, the earlier the reviews, the more they seem like they're just an extension of the PR machine. I don't know for sure that that's the case here. It's just an observation that I've made. It seems like the real reviews, they aren't super advanced. They come out much, much closer to the release date of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sort of becoming a trend that's increasing more and more. And it also feels like the advanced screenings are happening earlier and earlier, too.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah. I think, I want to say I started seeing talk about the Ryan Gosling movie, First Man. I want to say I started seeing discussion of screenings of that like a month ago, and it still doesn't come out until October.
Yeah, that's crazy. I think part of it might just be that there's so many outlets for movie news and movie reviews, so many podcasts and so many blogs and so many websites. And
you shouldn't let that stop you, though, from seeking those out.
Well, no, absolutely.
Especially
you should definitely keep listening to podcasts, all of them. Never stop listening to any of them ever. But I think because there are so many of those outlets that the PR firms for the studios have figured out that, if we give the really low-level guys really advanced copies of these films, they're almost always going to say something really positive.
To get the name out.
Exactly, because they want to see the name of their blog or their podcast listed as a credit at the front of the trailer.
For sure.
I get that. But I mean, it basically, it's just free PR for these films that they probably haven't really earned. Yeah. Which I am not in any way suggesting that that's the case with Roma. I'm sure it will be a very good film. Mm-hmm. Just an observation of the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I think you can apply that to so many. It applies to. I mean, I've seen it for every genre.
Yeah, absolutely.
I started hearing about that movie, The Nun, months ago already,
right?
And it's not even. It just looks like another nondescript sort of jump scare horror movie, and there's been all this advanced press about it, and I'm starting to wonder if that's just the playbook now, like you said.
Yeah, I think so, and I think you could just sit yourself down in front of YouTube, watch the 10 most recent trailers for upcoming films, and the little critic attributions at the very beginning of them, they're from places you've never heard of. Mm-hmm. They're not newspapers, they're not famous critics, they're not magazines you've ever heard of. It's just obscure websites and blogs. And I mean, when you see that and you have no idea where that comes from, I would hope that for most viewers, they just sort of dismiss that as, PR meaninglessness. But, who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Yep, it's they put the source of those reviews in much smaller print than the actual positive review they're giving when they throw them up on the screen. So to the filmmakers, it probably just doesn't matter to them.
Right, exactly. And I just want to say that we would never sell out that way. We are not those kind of people, so we would never do that until somebody made us an offer.
Absolutely right. You know where to find us. All right, coming up in the next segment, we're going to talk about Ethan Hawke's somewhat controversial comments about superhero movies, and then we're going to talk about Ethan Hawke's new movie that he directed called Blaze. Ethan Hawke caused, I guess, a stir in the past week when he let his opinions of superhero movies fly, causing a bit of a row on Twitter, people going back and forth, fighting like we do now in 2018.
That's what Twitter is for.
Here's the quote. I'm just going to read you a little bit from this actual story from The Guardian. Actor Ethan Hawke has questioned the quality of superhero films, saying that even the most praised are, quote, not Bresson, not Bergman, but they talk about it like it is. And he continues his quote, now we have the problem that they tell us Logan is a great movie. Well, it's a great superhero movie. It still involves people in tights with metal coming out of their hands. It's not Bresson. It's not Bergman. But people talk about it like it is. I guess they're repackaging the quote there. Hawke continued, I went to see Logan because everyone was like, this is a great movie. And I was like, really? No, this is a fine superhero movie. There's a difference, but big business doesn't think there's a difference. Big business wants you to think this is a great film because they want to make money off of it. So, I mean, how do you feel about that?
He's not wrong.
Well, he's not wrong, and I do agree. The problem is, I think that movies should just be judged on their quality regardless of genre. And he seems to think that superhero movies, because they're superhero movies, belong in a totally different category on their own.
Well, see, I disagree. I think what he's actually saying is the best superhero movies that we have to offer at this point are still not actually a caliber of great film.
And that's undeniably true.
Absolutely, 100%.
I mean, I love going to see superhero movies, but I certainly don't put them against some of the, more quote unquote films that I love.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would both agree the one film that reaches the furthest toward that destination has got to be Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
And we can talk in depth about whether or not it achieves that, but I mean, I think still Ethan Hawke's point is salient in that superhero films dominate the discussion of movies right now. And I mean, our podcast is a perfect example of that. We spend an enormous amount of time talking about superhero movies. There's just so many of them. Yeah. They dominate the industry's landscape. And I mean, his point, I think it's valid. And I think it's kind of ridiculous that it would even drum up any like real measure of controversy. But I will go on to say that I think this, in a way, kind of ties back into what the Academy tried to do a few weeks ago, where they introduced the idea of having this popular film category.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I think we're starting to see filmmakers and people in the filmmaking industry say, we need a distinction between what's really the best versus what's the favorite.
But let me get into a little bit more of why it's not that I disagree with the general thing he's saying, but the way he worded it, I had a little bit of a problem with. And the problem I had was, he says there's still people in tights, there's still people with metal coming out of their skin or whatever. That's the part I have a problem with. Now, if you want to say they're throwing Infinity War, there's 30 heroes. How can we have any character development? How can we have any coherent story? Fine. But he's saying it's because he's essentially just saying because it's a superhero movie. He's not really giving me what I think is a valid reason for why they're worse. I mean, I think he's implying it, and I don't think it's hard to stretch and figure that out on our own. But I just feel like there's room for those kind of movies. I haven't seen them yet, really, except for maybe like The Dark Knight, which was I know it won an Oscar for Heath Ledger's performance. I want to say maybe it was nominated for Best Picture. I wouldn't bet my life on that. But I just feel like, he used Logan as an example, and I liked Logan. I didn't love Logan, but that's the kind of movie that could become one of those movies that's sort of centered around a character, not 40 characters. It puts them in some real emotional situations aside from, constantly battling someone. So I don't have a problem with what he said, because the broad strokes, he's completely right about it. I don't disagree. But the idea that it can't be better because they have on tights and they have metal coming out of their skin, I just reject that. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but I think eventually it probably will. It's just not going to be one of these movies where there's 50 people on the screen at once.
All right. I think a more valid argument, and maybe he gets into this, this sounds like it's probably a quote just taken from a much larger statement on his part. I think the bigger complaint is that you have these kinds of movies squeezing out the other kinds of movies.
Right.
It's making it like no one has heard of or knows about the movie that we're about to discuss in our movie review section, directed by Ethan Hawke. It has virtually no footprint in movie theaters at all. And it won't, frankly. If anyone watches this movie, they're probably going to watch it on a streaming service, if and only they even know about it.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, he's not wrong in that the machine of the big blockbuster corporate movies that are being marketed to us, that they've now taken the next step of they're saying, they're not just the fun movies, they're not just the entertaining movies, they're not just well-made movies, they're also the great movies. They're also the best movies of the year. I mean, Marvel is already cranking up their Black Panther for Best Picture campaign.
Right.
I mean, big time. They're going all in on that. And as we've talked about, it's an important movie. It's a significant film. But I don't know that I want to go down the path where a movie like that is suddenly the best picture of the year.
The standard, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the measuring stick against which all the other movies that year are measured.
Yeah.
I'm with you there. So I don't disagree with the general thing that he's trying to say. And I don't know. Maybe I'm proving my own point wrong when I say, he's talking about it because of being in tights and metal coming out of their skin, and I say, well, that's not a good reason for him to say that, that's the reason he doesn't like them. But then of course I follow that up by saying, well, I haven't seen that movie yet, that's great. So he's not wrong. I just feel like he's being a bit of a snob, which is fine, because he's known to be sort of snobby.
Sure.
So are we with our opinions. And I'll tell you this much, I would much rather him give an actual strong opinion like this than to just be the guy up there who's just like, oh yeah, they're all great, all movies are great, whatever. You know what I mean?
I agree completely. Absolutely.
We definitely need more of that. And I mean, hell, like, no one is really standing up or making a lot of noise about independent films and the type of movies that he likes. And man, every summer when we talk about movies, I always tell you, I'm just dying for something that is not 90% on a green screen.
Yes.
I'm dying for something that has, practical effects and actually uses dolly track, and there's quiet moments with actors, and there doesn't have to be a gunshot every 5 minutes. So I'm not even talking about just comic book movies, but even action movies. Like, sometimes I just have a thirst for the kind of movies I know that Ethan Hawke likes to make. I've just never really been a huge fan of his as an actor.
Right. Yeah, understandable. Well, guess what? Ethan Hawke, he has you covered.
Yeah.
This is a perfect segue, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have not seen the movie, but Terrence is going to talk about Blaze.
Right. So Ethan Hawke has very, very recently released a labor of love on his part. And that is the very, very low-budget indie film Blaze. It's a biopic about the life story and death of Texas musician Blaze Foley. It's set in essentially the 80s, maybe the late 70s in there as well, and kind of charts his rise to stardom, if you can call it that, and his significance in what marketing sort of refers to as the country music genre that was booming out of the state of Texas in the 80s. But the movie is very, very careful to never refer to it as country music. All of the musicians refer to it as blues. So it's a very, very country flavored version of blues. But anyway, this movie is, again, like we kind of mentioned a minute ago, it's not something that a lot of people are going to see. It low budget, has no marketing behind it, just bleeds indie filmmaking in every way, shape, and form. And Hawke not only directed it, but he wrote it. He wrote it with the help of the main character's wife/widow's help. She wrote a book about his life, and the two of them collaborated on the screenplay for the movie. So the movie is about Blaze Foley. The role of Blaze Foley is played by a newcomer named Ben Dickey, who's actually a musician. He's a musician friend of Ethan Hawke's. And I mean, it is an impressive first role for a guy. I mean, they ask him to do a lot, and he delivers a lot. The whole cast is actually just pretty amazing.
I don't recall if you said, is Ethan in the movie at all? Prominently?
Certainly not prominently. There's a motif used in the film where two of the main character's friends kind of tell you his life story, and the person they're telling that to is a DJ who's interviewing them. That DJ is played by Ethan Hawke, so you hear his voice throughout the film, but with the exception of a few shots of the back of his head, he never really appears on camera at all. But yeah, the cast is amazing. There's another musician in it as well, and he plays one of Blaze's friends, Townes Van Zandt, and that's played by Charlie Sexton, and he is amazing. Like it wasn't until after the film that I found out that wasn't an actor, and I mean he's so good. I mean he's so good. The actress who plays Blaze's wife also should be mentioned. Her name is Aaliyah Shawkat. I've never seen her in anything before, but she's the heart and soul of the film. I mean, she's really, really amazing. She's also one of those actresses that you kind of only ever see in indie films. She's beautiful, but she's beautiful in a very unconventional way. She's not the typical lead that Hollywood would put into something, but when she's on screen, you can't take your eyes off of her. It's one of those films where the acting is amazing and the directing is also pretty impressive.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to sort of give me some color on Ethan Hawke's style as a director. I think he's directed before, but I have not seen anything he's directed.
Yeah, he has, and it's always pretty indie kind of stuff. He's clearly in love with that kind of filmmaking, and that bleeds through in this film. I mean, this film, again, I've said this several times already, but I mean, it's a micro budget film, and I mean, it looks like he's shooting on real film, and there are moments where you get light leakage through the gate of the camera, and whereas you've got directors who manufacture that, they create an artificial lens flare like J.J. Abrams, and it's a big expensive thing, and it's part of their quote unquote signature style. Here, that sort of thing is just an organic aspect of the filmmaking process. There's a great shot where the characters are in a big room, the room is lined with windows, the cameraman is just moving forward toward the actors to get a tighter shot, and as he does, he walks through a ray of sunlight coming in from a window that's off screen, and as he does, that light for just a second flares off the camera lens, polluting it, and then it disappears because the cameraman has literally passed through that ray of sunlight. Right. I mean, it feels just like the texture you would have seen in a film made in the 70s when they had to have that. I mean, the cameras were, cameras that were rented out to dozens of productions a year. They were shot on film. Film was expensive. You couldn't retake it if it wasn't a big enough problem. So you just use that take, and there's a lot of that feeling in this film. Just really, I think for people who love film, especially filmmaking in the 70s and the early 80s, this movie just hits home. It just feels like one of those movies.
That sounds like I'm gonna have to check that out, because that definitely sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of pros. The visual aspect of Hawke's direction, huge pro. The acting, huge pro. Again, the main actor, not even an actor, just his first role, he turns in a great performance. I will say the film is one of those examples of it's never greater than the sum of its parts. You don't leave transformed by it. I don't know that you walk out wanting to be an advocate for this being an Academy Award nominee or anything like that. And at the end of the day, it's sort of let down by the script. It's just, the script is not as good as the other elements of the film, and I don't know if that's because maybe Hawke was relying too much on the widow and her version of the story. It's tough to say. Like
he could have sacrificed something better for accuracy.
Yeah, I think so.
Which is totally understandable, honestly. I mean, you got to make it work either way, but it sounds like it was a pretty intimate portrait of this guy and his family, people around him, so he wanted to be authentic as possible. Yeah, you definitely can tell that Ethan Hawke loves actors. Yeah. I mean, he is an actor's director for sure. The actors are given just as much time as they could possibly want to build a scene slowly, to take it in the directions that they want to take it. And when he's in the editing booth, he's not chopping that down. He's keeping all that up. Before I wrap this up, I just want to say
what my kind of favorite, I guess, scene of the movie. It's, as I said, there's this motif of Hawke interviewing these other two musicians, and they talk about Blaze's life and, you know, tell some tall tales and mix it in with true events from his life. And the two actors who are performing those roles, we cut back to them periodically throughout the entire movie, and while one is telling a story, the other one is reacting to that story. And normally you would get that by cutting back and forth between those two actors. And Hawke, who is such a fan of actors, right, he quickly figured out that it's far more interesting to watch both of them on screen at the same time. So those interview moments in the film are almost always a two-shot. And while one of them is talking, you watch the other actor relate to the story. And I mean, it is just, if there is one reason to see this film, it's to watch those two actors perform those scenes. It's so great how the one who is not speaking has no dialogue, but is constantly moving his character's development forward through his facial reactions, through his body language, through what he does in response to what the other one is saying. It's so good.
It's always strange to me that more directors don't do more with actors who are reacting to something non-verbally.
Yes.
One guy that comes to mind that does that really well is Paul Thomas Anderson. He does that really great in a lot of his earlier movies. And especially now, it doesn't surprise me so much when it's a director who's a dyed-in-the-wool director came up writing, but when it's an actor who's transitioning to directing, I would expect that, because as an actor, you know, that's one of those things, even as a writer, as an actor, everything, you know, you always get that advice, you know, show me, don't tell me.
Yes.
So you would think as an actor, they would love to shoot other actors saying, you know, 1,000 words without saying anything, you know, painting a picture without saying a word.
Yeah, Paul Thomas Anderson is a perfect comparison for this film, or for Ethan Hawke's directing style, because he's another director who gives actors as much time as they need. You know, you think about, especially his more recent films, like, sometimes people are critical of how long and sort of sprawling every scene in his movies are, but it's because he's just a guy who loves watching actors work and just gives them all the time they need to find the character in the moment and just take it in whatever direction the scene needs it to go in. He's a great comparison. And I just want to add one last thing. In those two shots that I'm talking about, one of the two actors is an actor, Josh Hamilton. The other one is Charlie Sexton, the musician that I was saying. Again, there are two musicians playing pivotal roles in this film, and he does just as superb a job as the professional actor does in those reactions. Some
guys just have it, man.
Yeah. And the fact that Hawke somehow stumbled across two guys who could do that in this film, you know, two musicians that have that natural acting ability. Or, I mean, maybe that's actually a commentary on what a good director Ethan Hawke is.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a solid review. I think that's exactly what they would like you to do, which is, you didn't give anything away really, but you definitely made me want to see the movie. You know, good description of it, and I'm always thirsting for an independent movie to see. So I mean, I'm kind of surprised by the description of it that it even got a release, but I guess because it's so Texas centric, that makes sense.
Yeah, I actually think that it's maybe only been released in 3 cities, like New York, LA, and then it was released in Houston because of the Texas connection. A great deal of the film is set in Austin. A great deal of the film is set in Austin.
Ethan Hawke, that figures.
Yeah. So if you guys are in the mood to see an indie flick, something low budget but really, really well made, or if you just want to see where Ethan Hawke is coming from in his comments about superhero films, maybe check this out when you get a chance.
And I'll just add 2 pieces of useless information at the end of this. Townes Van Zandt, one of my all-time favorite cover songs, he did a cover of the Rolling Stones' Dead Flowers, which is amazing.
Interesting.
And the girl you mentioned early in the review, Aaliyah Shawkat?
Yes.
Shawkat? She is best known for playing the role of Maybe in Arrested Development. I don't know if you ever watched that show way back when.
Oh.
Yeah. So she was like the sister or whatever.
I did not make that connection.
Yeah, or the cousin or something. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've seen it. So.
Yeah. A little extra piece of trivia since you brought up Townes Van Zandt. allows all of his music to be used in this film, and he does that as a tribute to Blaze Foley. There's a little footnote at the end of the credits that saying as much, then goes on to say that he does not agree with all of the portrayals in the film. And I've got to say, he does not come off well in this movie at all. So I think the real takeaway there is you got to respect a guy who's kind of portrayed as not great as he is in this film, but still out of love for his friend who's passed away, lets his music be used in the movie.
Nice. All right. Well, we got one more segment in us. We'll talk about some trailers. Trailer segment. We still don't have a sounder for it, so I just keep saying that. First one we're going to talk about today is the new Fantastic Beasts movie, The Crimes of Grindelwald. I think I heard them pronounce it that way in the trailer.
I'll go with that. Why not?
Yeah, I'll go with that. So you saw the first Fantastic Beasts, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
It was fine.
Yeah.
You know,
I kind of instantly forgot it. I'd reached my maximum with the whole Harry Potter universe, so I wasn't excited to see it when I did see it. In fact, I only saw it a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. My biggest criticism about the Harry Potter films in general is that they let David Yates come back for the last 4 films, and that was 2 films too many for his style. It's just, I think he's the least inspired of all the director choices for that entire series. And so now we've got another Fantastic Beasts film. Yates did the first one. He's also doing this one. He's also tied up to do 3 more after this.
What?
It's a lot.
How many are there?
It's a lot of David Yates making these Harry Potter universe films. And I mean, it's fine. He's perfectly competent. I'm sure lots of people really, really enjoy his stuff. They did so many interesting things with who they chose as directors in the first half of the Harry Potter series that it was disappointing that toward the end they were just like, let's just keep going.
Yeah.
You know,
Alfonso Cuarón did one.
Absolutely.
Who we obviously love.
And I would argue is the best directed of the entire series.
Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yes.
So the trailer, I mean, there were some interesting visual tidbits in there, but they sort of run together with the last movie, you know.
Yeah.
Very dark, highly stylized.
A lot of Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
A lot of Johnny Depp being Johnny Depp on your screen.
Yeah, got to make those. Got to pay the IRS, man. He's got a lot of ground to make up from what I've read.
Well, he'll probably pop up in the next 3 films as well.
Yeah, so I'm not dying to see that one. That'll probably end up being a rental for me, but I know there's a lot of interest in it, so I figured we figured it was worth discussing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to crap all over that movie.
No.
I know Harry Potter film buffs are, excited that they have another series going on. I just think that, they caught lightning in a bottle with the Harry Potter films. This is clearly not Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It's the next best thing.
Yeah. I'll take a page out of Ethan Hawke's book and say, maybe it's good for a Harry Potter movie.
Fair enough.
All right. The other one we want to talk about is The Frontrunner, starring Hugh Jackman, who plays presidential candidate Gary Hart. Listeners of a certain age may remember him from the 80s when he got tied up in a extramarital affair with a woman who I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but I don't think they ever said it in the trailer, but let's
just say Stormy Daniels.
Let's just go with Stormy Daniels. Yeah, right. It's a recurring theme in American politics.
Yeah, timely, I think, is how we could describe this movie.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like Hugh Jackman, so I'm always interested to see him try something different. And this is a little bit different from the stuff we've seen from him lately.
Yeah.
He's done the superhero thing. He's done the singing, almost like Broadway-esque type stuff, comedy stuff. So I'm interested to see him in what looks like a straight up dramatic role.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of his, so I'm happy to see him showing up in something like this. And I mean, it is timely. I mean, it's a movie that's, about political scandal and how that can bring an entire career down. I think we can probably expect a lot of very obvious parallels on the part of the filmmakers about what we're supposed to be taking away from this movie, sort of like we experienced with Spike Lee and BlacKkKlansman.
Right. Sure.
Looks interesting.
Yeah, I would see it. I don't know about the theater, but I would see it. Maybe.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those movies that I might kind of hold off and see what the critical buzz about it is before I make a decision.
The trailer didn't scream for it to be seen on the big screen, but I also don't want to get wrapped up in saying, I only want to see crazy visual movies on the big screen either.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I mean, we spent 10 minutes preaching to you guys a couple weeks ago about going to the movies, so
Right.
I'm not about to back off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, if somebody that we respect says, hey, this movie is worth seeing, I'm there.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's about it for this week. We really appreciate you guys listening once again. We'll have another episode for you next week. If you want to reach out to us on Twitter, the Twitter account is @TechBloodPod, or you can just search Technicolor Blood and Twitter, and our Twitter account will pop
So after
up.
all this time, we have a Twitter account.
We do. We have a Twitter account.
Wow, this is what 2018 feels like.
Yes, I have yet to get in a horrible fight with someone on it, but if you put in the hashtag film Twitter and then just search for some of the conversations going on in there, I could have us in a lot of really nasty fights pretty quickly. There's some opinions out there that need to be discussed.
Well, really, all we need to say is we agree 100% with Ethan Hawke.
That's right. All right, guys. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll do it again next week.
All right, catch you next time.